I made a video previously, quite some time ago to be honest, about cobbling together a vertical hive. There's one available online and it's very intriguing to me. It looks like they've made a very good job of building it, and it's well built and it's well engineered. I've not used one. They don't have Canadian distributors, and I believe the pricing on the product is reasonable. However, with the exchange and the shipping across the border, just not in the cards for me. But I really like the technology. I really like what they've thought out for this hive. To show how I decided to cut the slots in the top and the bottom of this hive, it's a mountain of work because I laid all this out. I had to guess on dimensions from pictures that they show on Instagram, etc. So these slots need to be 3/8, 5/16 to 3/8 wide, and that's bee space, so that's so that the bees don't just fill them up. I don't have a 5/16 bit for my router. I don't know that they make such a thing. I suppose they do if you look hard enough, but I have a 3/8 straight bit. It's barely long enough to go through here. It's I think it's about 1 inch bit, but these are 7/8 boxes, being Canadian boxes. So all I'm doing here is I'm cutting the slots in here. I made a little jig here, and what this is this just a piece of very thin plywood board glued to a straight piece of thicker plywood that I can clamp on here. And it ended up being just about exactly the same length as the box, the two boxes butted up here. And then I cut it with my router so that this edge is exactly the offset. I don't know what the offset is, and I don't care because I don't have to measure that. This is exactly the offset of my router. I can run my router base against here, and my bit will run exactly here. So that allows me to take this edge, line it up with my cut line, and then make my cuts with confidence that they're going to be in the right place. My lines are in the center of the cut, and this is the edge of the cut, so I have to eyeball 3/16 of an inch. I don't think within a 1/16 of an inch or so either way is going to make or break this thing, but I'm trying to do the best job I can regardless. I've done a couple here, and I realized that what I can do, because I've marked these out where the slots should be, they're kind of staggered here. I've made them 3 inches long, and again 3/8 wide, but I realized that the one set of slots is like this, and then the other set is just 2 in the center. So I just marked on my jig here where my cut should be, because it should be there every time if I line this jig up with the edge of the box. So I'm going to do some cuts here, and you can kind of get an idea of what I'm doing. I'm going to wear some ear protection. There's a shield on this router to keep it from blowing wood chips in my face, but since I'm using the router right here, I'm going to use my safety glasses, which you should use anyway. And with my ear protection, I can't tell how loud I'm talking. I could talk kind of loud, I think, with my ear protection on. So this is a plunge router. I don't know if you ever used it. It's not a very good one. It's very sticky. So a plunge router allows you to go down like this into a piece, which is kind of what I want for this. If you try to do that with a handheld, you'll always make a mess. In this case, it's not that critical, but do the best job I can do here. So now I'm cutting these spaces right here. So we'll crank up and cut a couple. in order to make the next row of cuts. By the way, the spacing of these is the spacing of the frames. So when all is said and done, you can see the other slots here. The frames will sit between these sets of slots. So then the spaces between the frames will allow the bees to come right up the frame and then right up the slot in the box. I've gathered all this from pictures on their website. I kind of built this last year. I made a major mistake in this part. I didn't want to bother doing this, so I just cut a hole, and I realized that I'd blown up bee space and it was going to be a mess. So I thought, oh, I'd better try that again. I lost 2 boxes because of it. But, well, no pain, no gain, right? Router got away on me a little bit there, but it really doesn't matter. To be honest, this side I had planned to make the bottom. I'm working on the bottom, so there's going to be, between this box and the bottom board, be a space, and I think it'll be less critical what the bees do with this space than it would be on the top. Didn't use that router very much. Well, halfway in the job, my Ryobi 2 horsepower plunge router just died. I don't know, maybe brushes are stuck or something. I see they've got external brush screws on them, so I should just check. But I had this Black & Decker 1 3/4 horse in the drawer I got from a guy in a package of stuff. I never used it because the bit was stuck in it. It's only a 1/4 inch collet on it, whereas the Ryobi's 1/2 inch. I always like to use a 1/2 inch collet router, or at least when I'm buying one, because you can do both sizes with those. But it doesn't matter if you can do 1/2 inch bits if the router doesn't turn. It doesn't work very well at all. So I got the Black & Decker out, got the bit out of it, mounted my straight bit, and I was back in business. And I thought to myself, well, now my offset's going to be different. And it is a little different, but hardly at all. And the Black & Decker has a slightly smaller offset, so I can trim this jig to work just as well with the Black & Decker jig, with the Black & Decker router. So it looked like the stars are aligning for me today, other than my router breaking down. I never cared for that router anyway. Plunge router, but it's so sticky it doesn't plunge nice and smooth. This Black & Decker actually does, and I'm not a Black & Decker fan at all. I think they build pretty crappy stuff these days. But giant handles on that router get in the way. I'll just jig around now. I was doing lots of these. I'd make a jig for spacing of some kind, but I'm just making the one. Don't make complain about Black & Decker. That's not a bad router so far. Their stuff usually works okay. It doesn't work okay for very long is all. It's like both sides of that router. The bit is not centered in the base. It's close, but it's not centered in the base. Because the other way around, it was cutting into the jig, and this way it's not even riding against the jig. I take that back about the back building okay stuff, because that's pretty fundamental to a router. Black & Decker. The ironic thing I find about Black & Decker is they own most of the very large percentage, a portion of the woodworking and, well, tools, not just woodworking, tool companies in the world. Some pretty darn good tools too. Black & Decker Corporation owns some awesome companies. Black & Decker tools are kind of trashy. It's kind of weird, eh? I guess if you can't make it, buy it. Kind of like Microsoft. That's what they like. Done. 2 boxes bottom to bottom, and I had to trim a little bit off. The reason I cut down the bottom of these 2 boxes, because the frames are going to fit in here much like this, bottom to bottom. I need to maintain bee space, enough but not too much, between these two. The standard depth of 9 and 9/16 is normally what these boxes are. You end up with a little too much bee space. They'll comb that over, so that'll make it difficult to manage the frames in and out. I hope I didn't cut it down too far, because as we know, too close, they're going to glue those together. So we'll find out, right? There are really only 2 more steps to this. I'm going to screw it to a bottom board and mount the doors. 3 more steps. I have a little rod that I'm going to slide in the bottom for the frames to sit on. The frames will sit on, of course they go vertical like this, that's the whole point. So the frames will sit on the ear like this. I hope that works out. Commercial version actually has 2 supports, kind of one right in the middle and one here. I'm going to try to go with just the ear and a support that's a bit farther than halfway here. I had actually previously bought a small 3/8. I don't know if it's stainless, but it's a plated rod if it's not stainless. So here's my 3/8 unthreaded rod. It doesn't say that it's stainless. And of course, nobody in North America makes a rod like this, so this had to come all the way from China. So that's a plated rod, that's not a stainless rod. That should be fine for at least a good deal of time. And I'm just going to drill a 3/8 hole in the box right near the bottom here and slide that rod in. Of course, I'll cut it in 2 pieces. Slide it right in there. Arbitrarily 7 inches looks good. You know what? I'm going to make life easier for myself. Arbitrarily 6.5. Just so I'm not right in the middle of a joint here on the box joint. So what I want is I want this rod to slide in on the bottom, right up against the bottom of the box. So yeah, it's fortunate this is a box joint. I can see exactly where that bottom is, because I can see the edge of the material here. So that hole is going to be right about there. I love auger bits. Auger bits are so civilized. Now I don't have a nail coming through here that I'm going to drill into. Just skimmed the bottom. Well, I'll do the other one. So here's the explanation here as to what I've just done. I've drilled a hole in each end here at the bottom. I'll point on the inside so you can see it. So I've drilled through here, and that's just a support. This is a 5/16 rod, so I drilled a hole just so that would fit in there. And what that does is it supports the bottom part of the frame. I may want to put another one of those in here. The commercial unit does have one. I was hoping that these would sit on the ear, but now that I've got that frame in there, it tends to tip a little. I'm not sure if that's a real big deal or not. And also I could show you, maybe, this is how the frames go in, one from each side. And then there's a space between, which should be B space, just so they don't glue the frames together too badly. They always seem to anyway, B space or not. They just seem to love to glue everything together. My slots. I've got the slots cut here in the bottom and top, and I've got the rod installed to support the frames. I've screwed the whole thing to a standard bottom board. That'll work just fine. And then so pretty well the last thing is the doors. I've made these. I've installed a little shim here. It's just a 3/4 inch piece of plywood. I've installed a shim that will equate B space between the depth offset here of my frame below the box and the door. I don't want them getting too crazy in here. I may or may not want to change that depth, but regardless. And I've opted to hinge my doors at the front so that when I work the hive, that frame will play nice. So that when I work the hive, I need to buy my hinge yet, then the door will open thusly. And then the bees, the coming and going of the bees in the front here, will be separated from kind of where you're working in the back. I'm actually pretty excited to use this, so I need to get that hinge purchased, cut, and installed. Before I do, I'd really like to take this to my dipper and have him wax dip it. My boxes, my bottom boards are all wax dipped, and they last a long time because of that. So I'd like this to be wax dipped too. Of course, I have another door for the other side. So that's progress so far. We're getting close. Keep you updated on the progress and the use of this thing. I think this can probably be a pretty useful hive for certain people. I hear a lot of people complain that they don't like lifting heavy supers, and the world lifting heavy supers off a brood chamber is not really as much of an issue as a lot of places in the world, and that's because we don't have a continuous honey flow. Our honey supers really, for many people, are only on the hive perhaps for 30 days, 45 days. Mine are typically on 60 to 70 days. So typically once we manage the hives in the spring, get them up to honey flow strength, we put those honey supers on a hive, we pretty well leave them there. And we don't do a lot of brood chamber management during that honey flow time because it's not very long. And then once the honey flow is over, remove the honey supers, then we can do our mite tests, treatments, feeding, etc. for winter. But I think there's still advantages for this even in our part of the world, even in our climate. There are a lot of people who perhaps are have physical limitations, physical challenges that they have in their life, and I think this can be a huge bonus for people, and even people who don't necessarily have physical limitations and challenges. People who just, I mean, I'm a big guy, right? So there's not a whole lot, you know, in my day that I can't lift. There's a lot that I shouldn't be lifting. But there's a lot of people who are not nearly my size, so they don't want to be lifting those heavy boxes. Even a medium full of honey, that's a lot of weight. And I think this can really be an advantage for them. There's another thing that's an IPM strategy for drone trapping. You can put drone frames in here, have the queen lay up the drone frame, pull it out, and cut the drones out or freeze it, etc. And that's an effective drone control, it's not a mite control, a standalone mite control. It's a supplemental mite control. It's part of an entire strategy. It can help remove mites from the hive. So in order to do that, if you have your honey supers on a standard hive, you need to remove those to get your drone frame out. Boy, I've done a lot of that. I don't like that. It's a lot of work. So in this hive, you can do that. You can put your drone frame in here, you know, whatever configuration you think is best. Then you simply open the door. You can have honey supers stacked up here to the sky. You simply open the door, pull the drone frame. I really like that idea. So this, like I say, I'm really looking forward to using this because I think it's very innovative and it's thought out really well. I'd really love to ask the manufacturer things like, how did you determine the numbers and size of the slots that you put in the top and the bottom? I'm sure there was some kind of calculation or at least some kind of process of maybe trial and error they used for that. And we'll save it for later.